So when I was a little girl, I was very, very lucky that the community library was right on the corner from my house, so I got to walk there all the time.
How little were you?
Oh gosh, I had to have been like 10, 11, so I was pretty young enough to be able to walk by myself.
Okay.
Um, so I would walk to the library and read books 'cause I've always been a huge book nerd. In fact, I have a master's in literature. I love stories. So when I was little, I'd walk there in the summer when my parents would be at work, and just really loved it. So then when I was in middle school, I remember on a school field trip, we got to go to the big library in downtown Dallas. I'm from Texas, and my hometown library was like one floor. The Dallas Public Library, it was huge. It was like 10 stories high, and I remember looking up going, wow, all these stories and stories and stories of stories, right? Like literally stories of stories, and I was overwhelmed with the thought of how many books there were and stories, and I really thought you could learn anything here because there was like every floor had a different like subject matter, like history, geography, every different floor was a different kind of story, and I was just like really amazed by that.
So how did you get to read all of the books?
Well, I never read all of the books, but I definitely was very fortunate. Almost every year, we took a school field trip to the Dallas Public Library, and it was part of a research project. So I would bring a research topic, and then they would release us into the library and allow us to go to each section and find more information. And even though I'm only 30, this was before the internet was pretty big. So just that amount of knowledge in one place was amazing. And even though the internet does have a lot of knowledge, I feel like the fact that it's curated at a library makes it more special in a way because you know that the information you're getting is good. As where, online you don't always know who put that there. So I still think it's great that we have all this information right here accessible.
So now let's bring you into our library. It's not the Dallas Public Library
Nope.
thing, but we
It's a little
seem to have
hometown
a
library.
little bit for everything. What do
Yes.
you have to say about our library here?
So I really love this library, and in fact, it's great because it's a great community meeting place for me. I teach English as a foreign language, and I do a lot of private lessons. And the library is such a great, safe, open, clean, nice space that I can bring my students here and meet them and feel really safe. And there's great meeting rooms. So that's something about this library that I really value. It's got a great central location. It's easy from the bus if they're coming from Cornell. I live in downtown, so I can walk here easily. We've got great reading rooms, great private meeting rooms, and so it's been a place that I've been able to help share my expertise with my students and feel like they're in a good environment.
Well, we can't ask for much more than that. So you're doing the English with a second language?
Yeah,
program?
yes, I do. I teach professionally English as a second language. I have a master's in literature and a master's in ESL, and this is the place where I meet most of my students.
Okay.
Yeah.
I always, with second languages, I was always growing up and I would hear like water was also known as agua.
Sure.
And the ground was known as something else. And I always had everything equaling English and thinking that English was the real language and they were just using other words.
Sure.
Is there anything to that? I mean, is water water or is water agua?
It's interesting that you say that because I can remember taking Spanish as my second language in Texas, and I never really took the class very seriously until I went to Mexico on a mission trip when I was younger, and I remember thinking, oh my God, Spanish is their English. Like, it's real. Like, it means something. Like, all of a sudden, the connection that, like you said, agua, water, like, this substance has this word on it in our language, but in their language, it's this word, and they're equally the same. But, the idea that, like, which language really, like, shows the real word, when you think about that, when we talk about magic, like, people doing magic spells, like, I'm not talking like actual Wicca, but like in books. They always use Latin, right? Like Latin is the real form. Like if you use a magic spell and you use Latin because it's such an old language, that's the real word for it. And I always thought that was kind of interesting, this idea of like, why is it in the Latin all of a sudden it's the magic word versus in English where you don't just say like, water go, like in a magic book, it's going to be Latin usually.
So the history of linguistics
Oh, yes.
is what a little baby, goo goo gaga, who's over in Italy, does he still say goo goo gaga or is he doing it in Italian?
So actually, children, they start to learn language in the womb. So whatever language the mother is speaking, the child can hear a version of it. And when babies are born, if they hear recordings of people speaking in their mother's language versus another language, they will turn towards their mother's language. And whenever they start to speak, the sounds, the phonemes that they use, it's similar. across languages, but it will be more specific based on the language that they're of their environment. So depending on what language is spoken around them. And one time I heard a little baby on an airplane crying, and he goes, ay, 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 ay. And I listened, and they were speaking Spanish. And I was like, that baby's crying in Spanish.
So the Tower of Babel.
Sure, the Tower of Babel. You know, it's funny because the story of the Tower of Babel was one of those stories that when I was raised Christian, and now I'm an atheist. And I remember I was in a linguistics class, and we were talking about like language growth and change around the world, like how languages came from other languages, and how like geographic barriers change languages, and how we have language isolates that come out of basically nowhere. And I realized, like, wait a minute, but that means the Tower of Babel is totally not true. And it was one of those moments where like I started to go, how could I have believed this? So speaking of a book, the Bible.
So have you written a book yet?
No, I like to write for fun, but I'm very ADHD, so I'll kind of write until I run out of steam, and then I move on. But I have a lot of friends who are novelists, and I love reading local books.
And you encourage them to all come to the library.
Well, of course. Of course I have to, yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet
meeting
you.
Yep.